take a listen to something that Angus Young said about the Back in Black album. I found this old interview with him, and I was kind of taken by surprise to hear him say this, but at the same time, as someone who's been long fascinated by the Back in Black album, I'm really happy to have this insight into the album. I've spent a lot of time looking into the production and engineering and recording and all the circumstances of the writing of the album, and as you know, it's one of the biggest selling albums in history, and definitely one of the biggest selling, if not the biggest selling hard rock album in history. If you're interested, I've put some key facts about Back in Black and its sales figures down in the description box below, and you can read those. But for now, let's get right to the audio clip of Angus Young speaking about Back in Black, and then I'm gonna ask you for your input.
And Malcolm's always been very good in a studio creating time. Even when we work with like Mutt Lange, everyone said, "Oh, Mutt Lange produced Back in Black," where the Codswallop Ruin, because Malcolm sat in on most of it. And any of the songs that people remember on that album, you know, the ones that mean something, are the ones that Malcolm worked on.
Alright, I have spent many a head-scratching morning, evening, afternoon, whatever, trying to figure out how this same guy who produced Pyromania and Hysteria also produced Back in Black and Highway to Hell. Mutt Lange was able to create a pop band out of a band that prior to his collaboration had always been looked at as kind of a glorified bar band, or a band that wasn't quite polished enough to make it into the mainstream. So true enough, Highway to Hell prior to Back in Black represented AC/DC's breakthrough into the mainstream, and Mutt Lange also produced that album. But when Bon Scott passed away and Brian Johnson came in, the Back in Black album came as an even bigger success than Highway to Hell, and Mutt Lange is often credited for bringing AC/DC into the commercial mainstream. And here we have a direct contradiction to the idea that Mutt Lange is responsible for Back in Black. And I'm going to read into this a little bit here and say that if that was the case with Back in Black, it's probably even more the case with Highway to Hell. In other words, if what Angus is saying here is true about Malcom being the co-producer of Back in Black, he was definitely then, therefore, the co-producer of Highway to Hell. So let's reflect a little bit on what changes that might mean for the album and its legacy. First of all, it would explain a lot about why Mutt Lange and the engineer on the album, Tony Platt, never really have much to say in the way of technical revelations, or even revelations in terms of the songwriting process or the arrangements. The most you'll get out of interviews is they'll say, well, we made sure that we had the right setup, the right instruments, the right soundscape for each song, and then we did everything we could to accommodate the band, insisting that we didn't use too many effects, and we try to work around that. And then there's a little bit here and there in the grapevine about how they used reamped sounds or captured bleed-through sounds innovative ways while they were doing live recordings. But none of that really explains the enduring power of Back in Black or Highway to Hell. Now, I know from my extensive research on the albums that Malcolm Young and Mutt Lange clashed over the use of echo and over the use of, harmony vocals, with AC/DC as a whole and Malcolm preferring a much more raw sound like they had on the previous AC/DC albums like Powerage and Let There Be Rock. So, my question to you is, do you think that Mutt Lange's influence on Back in Black is overstated? Do you think he gets credit where maybe credit isn't due? I've also heard through my reading and listening to interviews that the album was recorded in the Bahamas, and Mutt Lange apparently spent a lot of time at the beach during the recording process. But I always took this to be a good thing in terms of him trying to stay away from the band, stay out of the mix, and let them get the basic tracks down and let them get the work done that they wanted to do, and then he could get the work that he wanted to do done separately so that they weren't clashing all the time. But it could also be that he more or less left the production work up to Malcom, and we know from interviews with Angus and Malcom that they had worked together very closely on the material. One example would be the song Back in Black itself, where the drum beat on that song, which is pretty memorable and iconic, was actually created by Malcom. Even though he doesn't play drums on the actual recorded track, he came up with the drum beat during the songwriting stage and was very involved in all of the arrangements of the songs. So the idea that he would have been more or less a co-producer of the album, that seems to track with me, and it does explain some of the album's style and sound a little bit more than thinking of it in terms of it being purely produced by Mutt Lange. Even more interestingly, the production is credited to Mutt Lange by himself. There's no mention of AC/DC or Malcolm Young. So if you have some thoughts on this, go ahead and put them down. Now, as we close out here, I'd like for you to listen to a clip I came across of Scott Ian talking about Malcolm Young as a guitar player. And I think this is really important in regard to his potential work as a producer or co-producer of the Mutt Lange era albums. So let's listen to what Scott Ian had to say.
Malcolm's always been my hero since day one because he basically taught me how to play guitar. As a kid, with AC/DC albums, vinyl albums, in my little bedroom on a turntable, I just used to sit and figure out how to play their songs. And it was all Malcolm. You know, it was all him. So I was learning how to play specifically by listening to what he was doing. He was my guitar teacher. He's the reason I learned how to play rhythm guitar the way I do. The way he played, the economy and the percussiveness of his playing, his right hand and his left hand together, were just so perfectly in sync at all times, and making it seem effortless. AC/DC always sounds real simple. People think, oh, that sounds easy. Oh, it's just a couple of chords. But try playing it right. That's my challenge to everybody all the time. That's why there's only one Malcolm and there's only one AC/DC.
Now, what I want to pick out of that comment is the idea of Malcolm being the foundation of the AC/DC sound. He's the rock on which the entire band is built. He is the chief songwriter along with Angus. But so I mentioned this and what Scott Ian said because I think it factors into Malcolm's perspective as a producer. And because he was so close to the material from the minute that it was born, he had a lot to do with writing the foundational riffs. He came up through each song, not to mention his entire history with AC/DC as a band. In other words, when you're bringing the heart and soul of the band into the control room with you to co-produce, you're going to get a really good effect. The only way that that could go wrong is if that person, in this case Malcolm, was too close to the material. If they had been so close to it that they lose perspective. But in the case of the album Back in Black, that wasn't a danger because the album was done so quickly. So I think that Malcolm was in the sweet spot in terms of being able to relate to the material and see it perfectly for the Back in Black album. And then Mutt Lange was there to help him realize his vision more clearly than he had been able to do in the past. And I'm sure there were many clashes between the two. But I think the Back in Black album makes more sense if you look at it that way. If you look at it as Malcolm's masterpiece with Mutt Lange as a facilitator of that vision, rather than Back in Black is the creation of Mutt Lange, who finally brought AC/DC into the commercial mainstream. And I think that's what Angus was saying in that clip. This is what I think, but what really matters is what you think. So if you have an idea about this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please drop it in the section below. And remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.